So, hello, everybody. If you're here right now giving me those beautiful smiles, I'm so appreciative. And if you're watching this on your own, I'm glad that you've made time for it. We have a packed hour, so I'm going to jump right in. And I have an incredible friend and colleague, Jax, who you might see in the corner. And Jax is going to let people in as they come late, which is just such a treat for me. For the early part of this time, would you mind staying muted so that I don't hear the stuff that happens in your background? This webinar is a little bit, it's actually pretty one way compared to a lot of the work that I do more personally with folks, but we're kind of info packed today, and I've got some time left at the end to answer your questions. And to respect everybody's time, I am going to make a time for us to end officially in an hour, but I can and will stay for another 15 minutes or so if there's like lingering questions. But I do this sometimes with my sessions, and so if you've done anything with me, you'll know that I'll let everybody come together and say goodbye. And then if people do want to stay a little bit longer, they can. So we'll get through everything that needs to get done in this 1 hour. You are so welcome to stay on screen. I love seeing your faces, and while I'm talking, I will often just like cycle through and see what, see what's landing for folks. But I also get it. You might just be listening in the background, or you might just not be ready to be on screen this morning, and that is completely okay too. All right. So, first of all, hello and welcome, and thank you. Let me get my screen up and I will show you what we're all here for today. Jax, you can see that? Does it say what can I do with the
Yeah,
ashes?
I can see it.
Yes, all right. Um, so before I do anything else at all, I just want to tell you where I am. I'm here on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. This is the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish people who've lived here and stewarded this land for forever, since time immemorial, really. I am so grateful to be an uninvited guest on this land that is now called Vancouver, BC, Canada. Um, I would love to know where you're coming from, and please feel free to pop it in the chat. If you do also know the ancestral lands that you're on, I would love to know that as well. I also want to acknowledge that this is a sensitive topic that we're going to be talking about today. It's cremation. We are talking about cremated human remains. Maybe the ashes of beloved pets. And that can be a hard topic. And I want you to know that while we're definitely going to have a bit of fun today, I have the highest regard for all parts of the after death caring process. And that's why I'm so passionate about educating folks in this arena. And I genuinely understand that things can come up for people when we're talking about what might seem pretty straightforward. So do everything you need to do to take care of yourself as we go. And I'm just gonna see if sorry. I've just got Jax, there's somebody in the waiting room. I think, you've done it. Thanks, my love. Um, and so if we find ourselves having any issues with bandwidth, you can always try turning your camera off. That sometimes helps. But I'm on really, really strong Wi-Fi, so fingers crossed. Jax is also going to let me in if something crazy happens and I get booted out. So we just get to know each other if that happens. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. It almost never happens. Um, all right. So let me tell you what we're going to get through today and who I am. All right. Some of you already know me, and for the new faces or new screens in the crowd, thank you for coming. I'm Krista. I'm Krista Ovanel. I am a funeral director, an embalmer. I am an end-of-life doula, and I'm a death educator. I'm someone who knows a whole lot about making death a more normal part of life. I create courses and curriculum for individuals and emerging doulas and the general public. I work with forward-thinking companies that focus on holistic advanced care planning, that focus on things like preparing for a sandwich generation, caregiving crisis would be probably the only word that I could use for it. And I find this work to be incredibly connecting. Yes, we are very often. I get up every morning and think about death and dying, and yet I find this work to be so unbelievably enlivening. So I'm really honored that you came here today to spend an hour talking about this pretty big topic. So let me share what we're going to do. So I want to kind of make a point that cremation is not necessarily a simpler choice. And so I want to run you through the cremation process itself. I want you to know what cremated remains are. I'm going to touch briefly on the environmental impact of cremation and our cremated remains, ashes. And then I want to talk to you about the three options that you have for dealing with, for handling cremated remains. You can inter them, you can, which means to either put them in ground or perhaps in a mausoleum. You can scatter them, or you can transform them into something else. Um, I'm going to talk briefly at the end about some kind of overlooked considerations, things that people don't always think about when they think about cremation. And then we will have some time for question. And like I say, we'll end at 10. And if there are more questions, we can stay a little bit longer. All right. So let's start right at the beginning. Where do ashes come from? What are ashes, right? Ashes are actually the product of cremation. So in our modern sort of industrialized society, the cremation process is either simply not known or often misunderstood. And a lot of people have some pretty big misconceptions when it comes to cremation. Um, and often in the North American context in particular, cremations are not witnessed in the same way that we would stand at a burial site and watch the casket go down into the grave. We often don't do that in the North American context here with cremation. So we don't know often what we don't know, and I really want to fix that. So a lot of people right now might have actually heard me say we don't often witness cremations, and they might have gone, "Wait, what? I can witness a cremation?" So we'll go more deeply into that later. But yeah, there's a lot that folks don't know about this. So I'm so glad you're here. You've noticed I'm a complete nerd. Oh, did you see my shirt? It says last responder. Come on, right? So I'm a nerd. I love talking about this stuff. So let's get to it. This is what's called a retort. All right, that is the furnace, the industrial furnace that the body is placed inside. It takes place in a in this this is a purpose-built chamber. All right, and it reaches almost 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is like 1,800 Fahrenheit, if I'm not mistaken. And the process, the actual cremation, only lasts a couple of hours, depending on the size of the individual, the equipment that's used, how new the retort is, how heavy the casket is, whether this is already heated up. If you're doing the first one of the day, it might take longer, right? And then what's left behind are the dry, calcified bone fragments, really. Everything else, the soft tissue, fluids in a body, breast implants, anything that's placed in the casket itself, that's been consumed by the heat and essentially vaporized during cremation. This is a very small chamber and it gets very, very hot. So at the end of that short process, um, at the end of that short process, you're not left with sort of a recognizable skeleton all gently laid in exactly the same position that it was placed inside, because there's like these little vortexes, these little heat vortexes that happen inside. And also during the process itself, the cremationist will ensure that everything is essentially going as it should. and things will get moved at that point as well. You note, I think you can see that this is a casket. It's a pretty plain, simple wooden casket in most, but not all parts of North America. A casket is legally required. In a very few places, you can legally cremate someone with only a shroud, but that's very, very rare in North America. Mostly it has to be what's called a rigid-sided container. And how nerdy am I? Did I seriously? Okay, yes, it's a rigid side. That's the rules, all right? A rigid-sided container. I don't like the way that sounds, so most people like me will just simply say casket. It can be as simple as this, or it can be even more simple, like the proverbial cardboard box, but it can also be a lot more ornate. It can be handmade. It could be a rental casket that you slip out the inside box, but this box essentially protects the cremationist, and it protects the dignity of the person inside it as well. So metal is removed after the bones are cooled, even your gold teeth. All right, if you ever wondered about that. I told you that the cremation process takes a couple of hours, but that's just in the retort. It actually takes quite a bit longer because after the bone fragments are going to cool a little bit, and then metal objects, like, so this is a joint, right? Surgical implants, maybe fasteners from the casket, or if you had like pins holding your collarbone together after that mountain biking accident in your 40s, right? We're going to either remove that manually or we're going to remove that with essentially a magnet. Not all metal is magnetized though, so we will do that before we do the next thing. And I can't stress this enough. The metal after cremation is not recoverable. And in, again, almost all parts of North America, it won't be returned to the family. Now that is not true where in every single part of North America, but it is in most most places in North America. All right. It is always separated out before the bones are processed. And this is why I don't want you to ever, unless you are very clear on this fact, I don't ever want you to place jewelry in mom's wedding ring or something like that, because with this romantic idea that it will stay with her forever. It will not. It will be separated out and then it goes into essentially a recycling program. Again, in some places you can get it back, but it's rare, and I wouldn't count on it. And it will be a mess. I mean, that is a very, very hot, hot furnace. All right. So the cremulator, how's that for a Scrabble word? Write that down. The cremulator, these machines are really strong processors, like a Hobart like a processor for onions, right? But they look a lot. This is one example. They don't all look exactly like this, but this is a relatively modern cremulator. They're very, very strong. And what happens is once the bones are cooled, they go into this. The cooled metal is separated out. They go into this machine, and the ashes are ground up. The bones are ground up into what we think of as ashes. All right. Oh, there's something that I totally forgot to say. See this? See this? See that box? See how there's only room for one person? In North America, in all of North America, only one person at a time. Pets are different. You can have an option for pets to be uh, um, co-cremated, but humans, you cannot. All right. So with that, though, how do we know that the remains are the right ones, right? There's a reel on this on Instagram. If you follow me on Instagram, you can probably hunt for that. This involves a lot of paperwork. Cremation is a very, very, very final act. You can always unbury someone, but you cannot uncremate someone, right? And so cremation offers doesn't offer cremation creates a ton of paperwork. And there's also something that I'll show you in a minute called a cremation tag. Um, there in some jurisdictions, like where I live here in Vancouver, BC, you can't actually cremate someone for 48 hours after the death has occurred at the minimum. You can, in fact, bury someone within 24 hours, right? So this is because it's so permanent, right? The paperwork includes coding and a number that gets attached to the person and to the cremation of that person. And in, again, many, but not all parts of North America, you're going to get a cremation tag. This was my dad's cremation tag, actually. This will either go in the cremation retort with the body, or it will be taped like right on the door while the cremation is happening. And then when the bones are cooling, this tag will remain. And then when it moves to the cremulator, that tag will be attached to the cremulator. And then when those ashes are placed in the temporary urn, bang, that cremation tag is there. That number is assigned to the person and to the paperwork. All right. So I hope that gives you a little bit of peace around how can I know? All right. Okay. This is my mom and my dad. All right. And these are just like to get to the point about how temporary containers can be literally anything. This is anchovies, and that's a film canister. But hopefully you can see that dad's here very, very fine, very fine. And mom's and the color is looking a little pink. It's actually very white in real life. My mom's a lot coarser. You think of dad's kind of Hawaiian sand here, and mom's very like West Coast sort of sand. And I wanted to show you that because cremated remains can really vary in color and texture and consistency. And this is likely due to the things that I told you about before, right? Some of it will have to do with the person, like how old they are, their bone density, how healthy their bones are, right? But it will also have to do with the temperature of the retort when the person went in, how clean or dirty the retort. And when I say dirty, I just mean soot, right? There's nothing else that it could be dirty with. How long it took to cremate, whether you were cremated in a very simple cardboard box or a super fancy, heavy oak, casket, right? Um, so they're very different, and it can really surprise people because we have all seen images on TV and in movies of ashes being these like light fairy dust kind of things, and often they are even coarser than my mom's and very clearly bones. If you're not expecting that when you open the container, it can be hugely shocking. So one of the questions that I get all the time after the how do I know it's my person is do they clean the machines, right? And yes, they absolutely do. Both the cremulator and the retort, there are strict protocols and they are followed with great care. Everyone working in this field understands that there needs to be reverence and attention to detail. The ashes are your person's ashes. But there could be microscopic traces of others. That's just the way it is. Unless it's the first time somebody has used that retort, no matter how carefully it's cleaned, there will be something called commingling because you just can't clean it to like a microscopic kind of level. So after all of this takes place, so this is now, we're probably looking at the next day, the remains are placed in a temporary urn. This is an example of an urn that's still used in a lot of parts of North America, although a lot of them are shifting to cardboard boxes now. And you see, this is what you'll get back from the crematorium. We'll talk about urns in a second. This is what you get back from the crematorium if you don't supply an urn or buy an urn or what have you. If you're scattering, look at how heavy this plastic is. You really want to bring scissors. That is like the number one rule, right? You can also ask at the crematory to have the remains, or at your funeral director, you can ask them to divide up the cremated remains so that they're in little bags, a whole bunch in one bag, and then maybe some keepsake amounts for others. These are all things that should be done at no extra charge. You can also do it yourself If somebody tells you there's a charge for it, please phone me. I'll have a chat with them. If you live in my neck of the woods and you're not comfortable doing it yourself, call me. I'll do it for you at no charge. All right. Um, you do not have to purchase an urn from a funeral home at all. You do not. You will always get a temporary urn, and that should be included at no cost. All right. If you want to, you can purchase an urn. Sometimes I've heard it phrased, oh, well, you'll need an urn. And people who don't know think that that means that they have to buy an urn from the funeral home. You can, but urns can be anything. All right. They can be truly anything. Cemeteries might have rules about sizing that will need to be followed if an urn is being placed in the ground or in like a niche in a columbarium. But other than that, you can use anything that you want for an urn, anything, right? This is a mason jar. I very much plan. The mason jar that I have set aside is actually bigger than this. My daughter uses it to make kombucha right now. That is very much what I plan on going out in. Here is an example. This is empty, my friends, but here's an example of a very, very formal urn, right? You can you can keep things in paper bags. You can put things in meaningful
Oh,
potteries and stuff like that. You can have I saw actually one made out of Lego, a little Lego house once, wooden boxes. There's specialized urns for pets, but you can truly use anything. Just remember that if you're doing a cemetery placement, you might have to adhere to certain size restrictions. All right. And then remember when I said that you can get the ashes separated out so that you have a little bit of keepsakes. These are formal, like store-bought, if you will, keepsake urns, right? And they have like a little pretty tree on them. They're just that big. They're really actually they're pretty darn adorable. But keepsake urns, let's see if I'm smart enough to do this. Keepsake urns can also look like smaller containers that you already have. I drink a lot of Earl Grey tea, and my family has like strict instructions that there's to be the main set of urns that are set of cremated remains that will be interred. And then we have two of these set aside. I have two kids. For when the time comes, and they have a whole thing in place about how they're going to make sure that they seal it shut because they don't want to accidentally have a guest or a neighbor like open my Earl Grey tea, right? That would be very uncomfortable. So they truly can be anything. And I don't ever want you to feel like you're kind of pressured into to buying something somewhere. All right. By the way, I know that I'm coming at you like a fire hose, and I'm sorry. Actually, every time that I do something like this, I always get like a little note from Zoom that says, "You're talking too much." And I am. I get that. But there is a lot to say, and we are going to have, like I said, a bit of time for questions at the end. So let's move on to the environmental impact, all right? I want to address that because this is something that not everybody knows, right? Um, people sometimes think that cremation is a greener alternative because it doesn't quote use land. It's not a waste of land. First of all, cemeteries are never a waste of land, ever. That's a different webinar. You can sign up for that one too. It is also free, but cemeteries are not a waste of land. All right, first of all. Um, the thing is that so many of us make really good environmental choices in life, and they might feel that, gosh, I would like to know about the environmental impact that my death might have as well. And one thing that you do need to know is there's kind of a one-two punch with cremation, right? First is that the cremation uses really high temperature retorts, I'm sorry, that consume a lot of energy and they release CO2, right? They might release mercury or other elements from things like dental fillings or metals or plastics that are in the body. That literally goes up in smoke. into the atmosphere. Yes, there's filtration, but it's not particularly standardized, and it is still going up and out into the atmosphere. The act of cremation itself has a very high carbon footprint. There's no getting around that. And then it's important to note that remains are they're primarily calcium and salt, right? They have a really, really high alkalinity. They have a high pH. They're usually somewhere between 9 and 13, which is chemically similar to limestone or to concrete or to bleach. That's more similar to those things than it is to like wood ashes from your stove, right? And this alkalinity means that scattering ashes in enclosed bodies of water or small little patches of land that can dramatically alter. It can harm, actually, not just alter, but it can harm aquatic plants, animals, ecosystems on land. So I urge you, we're going to go into scattering, all right? There's ways to make it safer, there's ways to make it meaningful. So I urge you to just think this through, to know this as you go into these decisions. All right. All right. So with that, what are your decisions? What are your options? We have three options, right? Scattering is by far this is not I'm not a scientist. This is not a real graph. But it is actually kind of in rough terms, it is sort of how things actually go. Scattering is by far the most popular choice in North America. And then interment. And then there's a really, really, really long tail of options when it comes to being creative or creatively transforming the ashes, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But there's one other option that no one talks about. Um, and it is actually the very most common option. And I don't know if you know what it is. If you think you do, you can pop it in the chat. This is This is not a broken slide. The correct answer is actually nothing. We mean to do something with cremated remains, but we don't. We don't get around to it, or we don't know what to do in the first place. Or there's family division, family strife that suddenly feels like it's been too long and now it's just awkward. And that's why you're here, right? That's why you're here today. So let's go. Let's make sure that you don't make that super common choice. Have you heard this one? It goes around Facebook and stuff every once in a while. It's like, I want to have my ashes put into an hourglass so that they could still be part of family game night, right? The thing is, you could actually do that. If you want to do that, tell your funeral director because they can tell the cremationist to make those ashes really, really, really fine, like as fine as my dad's. I'm not doing this with my dad's ashes, by the way, but I could because his are so fine. You make them absolutely sandy, right? So I will go through the options, which again, I'm gonna go through them one by one. They're scattering, interring, or being creative, creative transformations. All right. When you are scattering, um, you really want to start with the weather. All right. Pretty a nice day, not windy. A lot of us have seen that famous clip from The Dude Abides. What's that called? Where it just comes right back in their face. That is really a thing that happens. So start with the weather. But then there's a couple of other things that you might not have top of mind. Let me just take a sip. Where you are, who is nearby, and how you're going to mark this place. These are things that often people think, oh, yeah, 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 I'm going to scatter. But once they get to the first place, the first thing that might get them stuck is where, where should we do this? Right. So I'll go through some legalities in a moment, but depending on where folks are from, it's going to be a little bit different here and there. But there are, in fact, a lot of places that you can scatter legally. There are a lot of places that you can scatter without asking anybody to. I did not. I'm not suggesting that any of these law-abiding folks here in my Zoom room would do that, but it's a true story. But if you are lucky enough to know where you're going to scatter, then definitely once you are scattering, note where you are. You might want to return to that place one day. Note also who is nearby. I've heard so many stories of people who are like, "Oh my God, we were on this beautiful like beach in Hawaii, and all of a sudden I got like ashes across my toes or whatever." I had to hear somebody's sermon and that clearly they were doing this. Like, be considerate, right? For yourself and for the people around you. And then if will you mark it? Are you able to mark that space? At the very least, note where you are, right? Now, with the legalities, I can't go into detail because we kind of are from all over the place, but these rules are very like specific jurisdictionally, but here's a few kind of quick tips, right? Ask your funeral director. We go to school for 2 years. We take courses in law, in funeral law. We know where you can scatter. If you don't have a good relationship with your funeral director, or if it just feels awkward, ask me. Send me an email. I'll help you get the exact information that you need to know, right? You can ask Google. And I have a kind of a resource sheet that is in my little workbook that I sent out. So that there's a few tips there, right? But you can usually do things like scattering ashes laws where I live, right? So laws Vancouver, BC, right? Or cremated remains disposal regulations in water or something like that, right? So this will usually bring up government or specific public health rules to where you live. And one more tip is that I would genuinely recommend being discreet, right? I can't stress this enough. It might be legal, but is it appropriate, right? I know of a gardener, a beautiful public gardener a garden like here in where I live, who really doesn't like the fact that he is constantly coming up against ashes. These are human remains or pet remains. And I think we really need to keep that in mind. Like this is these are you would never just drop someone's skeleton in a rose garden that wasn't yours, but that's what you're doing, right? So it might be legal or you might have permission for it, but is it appropriate? Will it impact the environment? I think is a really important question. Bringing someone's cremated remains back to a place of personal significance is a beautiful option that you have with cremation, right? But there, you could, if you're granddad always went to this like little cottage on the lake, right? Depending on how big that lake is and depending how many grandpas lived there, you could actually really alter the pH of that body of water quite significantly, right? Um, and same with like, do not dig a hole and put the entire 8 pounds of cremated remains in and then plant a rose bush on top. It will die. Don't do that, right? So it's going to impact the environment. The question is just how. And then my final sort of like consideration for you is I can't tell you how happy I am that this is advice that I give everyone, but I also follow myself, which is honestly the best kind of advice, I think, right? Hold some back, right? I as long as you think it would be okay for your person to have been separated out like that. But sometimes we either make decisions very, very quickly, and we might later kind of be like, gosh, I wish I had something that I could do something with that I'll talk to you about in a second. Um, or you might just want to keep a little bit so that as other places come to you and as you go to them, you can scatter a little bit around. So I genuinely recommend if you think it would be okay with your person, hold a little bit back. You saw as easily as I did it. Where's that slide here? This is like, I mean, I'm a bit of a good enough is good enough kind of person, right? But that's like literally what it looks like in my house. And actually there's less now because I've done some things with those, right? This is the kind of This is the kind of day that I want you to be thinking of. Choose a nice day. I cannot stress that enough. The wind, the rain will turn cremated remains into like the kind of rain that we had yesterday, for example, here where I live, that will turn cremated remains into like concrete as you're pouring it out. And wind is a real factor. If you're thinking about scattering in water, there's a few things to know. You can do it straight from an urn, or you can use a biodegradable urn like this one. And this will slowly release the ashes as it breaks down naturally. The baggie inside won't have the metal clip on it, won't have any plastic. It will be like a cornstarch bag, right? Do not throw an urn like this into the ocean thinking that it will sink. It may or it may not. Don't do that. Do this instead. If you're traveling with cremated remains, it's usually pretty straightforward, but there's a few things to keep in mind. Rules depend on where you're going, depends on where you're coming from, which airline you're flying. So always, always, always check in advance, right? Check with the airline directly. Most airlines are going to allow ashes either in carry-on, almost always in carry-on, sometimes in checked luggage, but they prefer a sealed container, not metal. They're going to have specific rules, right? And actually, people are really kind through airport security typically. So it's actually a pretty nice experience. There is cremation specific paperwork that you are likely going to have to bring. So probably the cremation certificate that is part of the paperwork I told you about before. That's going to be necessary if you're traveling internationally, right? Um, and if you do have like the right urn and the right paperwork, it can actually, people are often really nice, like really nice. So, scattering tubes, they are simple, respectful ways to scatter ashes. They're basically like long, narrow containers that let you release the ashes like a big, big salt shaker, right? It makes the scattering process feel pretty like ceremonial, pretty intentional. This company, Eternal Life, they have like a like you can once you do the scattering, you can click that little QR code and like upload where you are and whatever. I think it's a bit overdone, frankly, but whatever. It's like it's fun, right? People are thinking these things through. You don't need scissors, so that's a definite up with scattering tubes. I will say that many funeral homes charge $200 for this puzzle box, right? So does it make it $200 easier? I'm not sure. Like I'm really frugal. My people are Ukrainian, right? So I'm not sure, but it's an option. So now let's look at interring. All right. Interring cremated remains can be really, really comforting. It gives you a permanent physical place to visit, right? And the the it can be a place where like other family members are, for example, or it just like feels really meaningful. I'm a big fan. I have an in-ground plot selected out for myself. The downsides are really only practical. Spaces in cemeteries can be limited. Some locations might feel really far away. And there's costs, right? Your niche, these little ones are niches, these big ones are whole bodies. These little ones will be cheaper up here and cheaper way, way, way down at the bottom, and they will be most expensive in the middle, and they can range in price. And same with in-ground burial of cremated remains. You've got to buy the plot of land, you've got to pay for the opening and closing fees, and you don't have to, but for the most part, people will select some kind of marker stone. So those are all costs, right? It can still be a thrifty choice though, because this, like mine, has spot for two. So it's like kind of a deal, right? So, and again, there are so many upsides, but cost is definitely something that needs to be factored in, right? You can also choose, again, a thrifty choice can be scattering gardens or ossuaries. That's another fancy Scrabble word for a common interment plot, right? That's also an option. It's very affordable usually. And like this garden is a scattering garden. But like don't just go to somebody's garden and do this, right? Remember, appropriate, appropriate. So now let's look at, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Let's look at all the creative stuff that you can do because honestly, the sky really is the limit. And I want to say that for essentially all of the creative options, you really are dealing with only a very small amount of cremated remains, very, very small. So you do need a plan B for the bulk of the cremated remains, right? I'm going to kick this off with one of the most creative things that I have recently heard of, which is definitely it's kind of a form of scattering. But there's a company called Ashes to Space. It's an American company. And they will put teeny, teeny amounts, like a ceremonial amount, like this much, on a boosted rocket. And it will go out into space, orbit, and then upon entry, the thing will burn up and your ashes will be permanently scattered. It's very, very affordable. The only other options like this take the, I think usually a little bit more of the cremated remains go up nearly to space in a hot air balloon. Very, very, very expensive option. Um, and uh, and I will say that both of these options, like the hot air balloon, a little bit less, but this rocket, if environmentalism is your thing, as cool as this is, wow, that is a big environmental impact, right? Super fun though. So I, wanted to show you. There are so many options. There's a woman here where I live, a woman named Kathy Terapaki. She mines her own clay out on the banks of the Chilliwack River. And then she casts the pot and she creates the glazes. And this one right here, that's a pot that my sister made with some of my dad's remains in the glaze. Well, Kathy made the pot and everything, but she gave my dad's cremated remains to Kathy, and those were placed in the glaze. So you don't actually put the ashes in the clay because that would wreck in the kiln, right? But in the glaze afterwards, you can do that. So like, isn't that beautiful? And nobody has to know, but it's an option, right? You're only using a tiny bit of ashes in a tiny bit of glaze, though. So keep that in mind. I already talked to you about going to space. This one here is an example of acrylic jewelry. This is very inexpensive. Some people DIY it. You can find it on Etsy. This one happens to be a ring, and it's relatively simple to make. Again, we're talking about a thimbleful of cremated remains that are placed in acrylic and then placed in some, jewelry. Maybe it's a necklace, maybe it's a ring, what have you. There's a company in the UK that will literally press cremated remains into either your favorite track or it will make its own track. And the sound, the hissing and popping of the way the cremated remains are in this is its own thing. This is an example of a larger company that does essentially like cremation jewelry, where it's not made out of cremated remains, but it is cremated remains. There's a space for them inside the piece, right? These are generally relatively mass produced, and they could be towards the lower end of the price scale, but still a few $100s or what have you. Yeah, sorry, sorry, everybody. Oh my gosh, I completely. Sorry, I got all excited and I pressed buttons. The fireworks, all right, that's genuinely a thing. Again, though, a tiny bit of cremated remains are packed into the fireworks, and so it's like 100 grams or so, and you get like I'm switching because I'm a Gen Xer. So 100 grams is like a quarter pound, and you get like 8 pounds, right, of cremated remains. So there's not like you gotta have a plan B. This is an example. There's all sorts of artists. One of my best friends is an artist who does who does like blown glass, and you can have some of the cremated remains placed right inside. This one I'll talk about in a second. These are my friends at Touchwood Memorial Rings. I'll show you a bigger picture. There is an option to make diamonds out of cremated remains. I got to tell you though, it takes almost a year. It costs about $10,000. And there is some question as to what the carbon is actually being made out of. So Anyway, but it's a thing. It exists. Very expensive, takes a long time. So, I just want you to have the realities in mind. I'll show you these in a moment as well. These are called parting stone. They are a beautiful transformation as well. But before I show you that, I actually want to talk to you. I want to show you something that I have from a beautiful Canadian company called Nia Emberley, which is such a lovely name. But so. This is a practice that it's a relatively new company and they're quite innovative. They've patented this technology. But this, I'll show you in a second with just me. This is actually the leftover cremated remains are cast into this beautiful little piece that ends up. I usually don't usually have it here. I usually have it off in my other room. And then this is the actual bracelet. So let me stop my share for a second. This is the actual bracelet, and these are made of my mother and father's cremated remains. There's a whole, I'm going to be doing a series on Instagram actually about this process, but it's essentially a multi-step process. It takes about 3 weeks. And then you can choose a glaze color. I did not. I chose just the clear glaze. And this beautiful bracelet, oops, is mine for forever. And I absolutely love it. Right now, with everything going on in the world, I am big into buying local and I'm big into buying Canadian. But I can't say enough about this beautiful, beautiful little company doing this incredible work. Um, let me share another one with you, another beautiful Canadian company. This is a ring that I gave my partner when we decided not to get married. Was a pretty significant decision. And so we both wear rings, but we're not married. And this is an opportunity to have a little bit of cremated remains on the inlay of the ring. Touchwood Memorial is run by Nicola Finch and her husband David. And their process is, again, it takes several weeks. I think it's also around the thousand-ish dollars. This is all handmade. Very, 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 very beautiful. And remember, too, you can find all sorts of artists on Etsy and things like that. You can do stuff with yourself. But remember, you're going to be using the tiniest little bit of cremated remains. With the exception of these two companies, right? One is Living Reef Memorial. They have one in the States too, but Living Reef Memorial Canada. And the other is Parting Stone. Let me show you what these two look like. So this is Living Reef. There's essentially a urn that you are cast into. It's like a ocean safe concrete that you are cast into. And then you're dropped into the ocean. And over years, you will form a safe and wonderful place for the little fishies and whatnot to grow up and be around. There's two options. You can have your own like mansion, or you can have more of a condo. And please, please pop it in the chat. I would love to know. Why didn't I mention tattoos? Because actually, just like the glaze on a pot, you could put cremated remains in an ink, and then you could draw the ink into the tattoo gun and make a tattoo, but you cannot put subdermally the ground cremated remains into someone's body. It will reject. So any tattoo artists who says that they're doing that, they're not. They're sort of making a tea out of the cremated remains and ink, and then they're putting the liquid into the ink itself. All right. So the last little things that I want you to consider is that cremation is just disposition, all right? I I want you to remember that everything that we do with burial, we can also do with cremated remains. Taking care of the body before the cremation takes place, maybe having a visitation or a viewing, maybe having a service during the cremation, just like when you're at a grave site and you can watch the cremation, the burial take place. You can watch a cremation begin. It's a witnessed cremation and it's a beautiful thing. it's not icky at all. And if you do have a bit of an ick response, then I would basically say like kind of check your worldview because like whole cultures have this as their norm default setting, right? This is weird for many white North Americans. It is not weird for the global majority, all right? Um, Afterwards, too, there are opportunities for gathering, for memorialization, for things like this. This is where some of my mom's cremated remains are, and a marker that is placed very, very close to where her cremated remains are. So it's not a it's not a cemetery, but it's still a place, right? So if this stuff fires you up, if you love talking about this, you might want to check out some of my courses. I do courses for death doulas. I do prep school, which is holistic advanced care planning. I have mini courses that are on demand and don't actually have a closed, sorry, I knew I would find a typo eventually. Mini courses on dementia, elder transitions, wonderful stuff. I do keynote speeches. I do corporate wellness. I do one-to-one guidance. There's a lot of ways that we can stay connected. I'm going to follow up with an email that will have this recording and a couple of more resources for you. And I'm sorry, I meant to have 10 minutes. It looks like I only have 5 minutes for questions, and I'm so very sorry about that. But let's see if there's anything in the chat as we come back together. And thank you for bearing with me while I was doing that. Let's see in the chat. All right. Um, oh, I love that. I haven't known anybody who's done a living reef. And I see, where did that? Oh, there it is. My question concerns mixing of ashes after two partners have died. Are there people who offer this sensitive service? Absolutely. Like the funeral home that took care of it in the first place should do that for you. And if not, if you are not comfortable doing it, then I'd do it for you. And if you don't have a relationship with that funeral home anymore, then you could just ask another funeral home to do that. And they're normally pretty lovely about it as well. All right. Um, how can you arrange to attend a cremation? You can also unmute, my loves. We're relatively small group. So how can you arrange to attend a cremation? You can, that's called a witnessed cremation. And while you are making the arrangements with your funeral director, you can ask, may I attend the cremation as a witnessed cremation? Just use that language. There will be a charge for this. And the reason for that is that they are essentially closing the crematorium for you and your people so that, and you might be essentially bumping someone out of line. And you can come in, you have the opportunity for one last gathering, and then you go into the retort space. You either assist or you allow the cremationist to place the body in the retort, the door comes down, and you press the button and then the flames come up. Or if you're not comfortable doing that, the cremationist, the flames come up, and then basically normally you take a few minutes there, go back into the softer room, spend a few more minutes just sort of getting your head on, and then you head off into wherever or whatever, come back the next day, or the next day you go in to the funeral home and get your cremated remains. Um, Barbara, I've heard that you've told me that before. I love that you've shared that with the group. I always travel with a little bag of my son's ashes and have spread them in many wonderful places. I think that's so lovely. For my lovely friend Sigrid asking about green burial, I very much want you to stay connected. That is either going to be February, no, I don't, it'll probably be April. In April, I'm going to have another seminar just wholly on green burial. Later in the year, I will have one on other green alternatives, like alkaline hydrolysis, which is a water-based cremation. So stay tuned. I can talk to you for an hour for that one as well. Um, Many thanks for the pet cremation. Is there an option to not get the ashes back? What happens to them if not returned to the family? That's a great question, Janet. There's not an option for that with humans. Technically, the executor must come and claim the ashes. And if you don't, there's a bit of a process that goes through where they kind of hunt you down because the cremation place is not a cemetery. Like they're not allowed to just hold on to human remains, right? Your vet would be the best person to answer that question. I believe there is. And then what they will probably do is a very similar thing where there would be a common scattering, and it would be done with respect and whatnot. We have, okay, so here's the deal, friends. We have, I'm going to unpin myself. We have 1 minute to go before we can formally close. So, what I would love to ask you is pop in the chat a word or a phrase or something that you're kind of fired up thinking about now after this hour together. And don't press enter yet. And once you have that word, I would love for you to just give me a thumbs up and then we'll all press enter together. I'm going to just find myself here and unpin myself. Um, Jax, actually, can you do that? Can you go to me and I think it'll say unpin or unspotlight or something like that. All right. And everybody on three, 1, 2, 3, pop it in the chat for me. Okay. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. So, um, a word. So much to think about. Digesting green. Um, Inspired, empowered, scattering, exciting, informative, create, grieving, much love to you. Mm. Compassion, informed, possibilities, inspired, letting go, and creative. Oh my gosh. I know that. Here, I'm just going to do this. There we go. And I can see you now all around me. Hopefully, I'm not all big for you still. I am so grateful that you wanted to spend an hour of your day on a weekend talking and learning about this stuff. I'm so, so, so grateful. I'm, as you noticed, quite excited about this and eager to answer your questions. So, what I will do is just say right now, thank you and goodbye to anyone who needs to go. And then we will stay on for another 15 minutes, let's say, to and it, at most if people do have questions, and we can just unmute and have a bit more of a conversation. All right. So thank you for being here. You're so welcome. Oh, another one snuck in at ease. Sabina said at ease. So grateful for all of you, my friends, as you disappear. Don't feel that you have to stay. If you need to go, go, but the time is here if anyone has extra questions. All right. So anybody who feels like they are sticking around, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if because thus concludes the formal portion of our time together.
I have a question, Krista.
Mhm.
Thank you, first of all, so much. This is wonderful.
Oh, thank
Really, really helpful. I have we kept some from a couple of family members, um, little bags of their ashes, but I realized that it's actually more, more than we will need to create any kind of, and so what do that the large portion of them has already been, uh,
like buried.
buried.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now I'm sitting here with these tiny bags, but they're actually
Yeah.
not really tiny
They're
because
not
there's
really
quite a
tiny.
bit
I
in them.
know. I
And
know.
then
So a couple of options, these are human remains. So be intentional, be ceremonial, be thoughtful, take your time, all of those things, right? Um, since you have a burial place, the I mean, one option, I put it on the table. It's not one most people choose. One option is paying the opening and closing fees and actually having them placed in the cemetery. That's a pretty expensive option, but I just want people to know it does exist. Another option is I actually placed some of my mom with her sister at the cemetery where my auntie is, um, and not a bit of asking anybody's permission or anything. I just went in like near the cemetery near her spot and then just put a little bit there. So that's another option. The other thing is just thinking about scattering where it makes sense. One of the things that drives me so crazy, and like the reason that I'm so compelled to have this session a few times a year, is because that slide that I showed you of doing nothing, right? If we do nothing, then what ends up happening is people essentially end up with double sets of remains. Like you have remains now, and then when you die, your executor is going to have your remains and somebody else's, or in this case, multiple people. So scattering is a totally reasonable option. Or if you're really stuck, then clearly label them. That's the other bit of advice I would have. Clearly label them, so and so's ashes, even if they're mixed together, like just say who it is. Because I have heard from people who later realized that they like threw out somebody's ashes and they felt horrible about it, right? Because they didn't know what it was. So just like, is that good? You're so welcome, my love. Anybody else? Oh, two red hats. Look at Sabina and her partner. Beautiful. Eveline, what do you have for me?
Well, I don't have a question per
Oh.
se. I just have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I just wanted to say thank you for this. I found it all very interesting. I'm a member of our local cemetery committee.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this kind of helps when we're looking at our bylaws and stuff and future uses because as we have found with our small town, um, very few full burials get done anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's all pretty much cremains, and so
Mm-hmm.
we've had to start thinking about the future and also when we have to expand the cemetery, what
Yes.
options we want to put in, like scatter gardens and that kind of.
Yes.
So this has all been really fascinating.
What town are you in?
Nipigon, Ontario. It's a very small town.
Yeah, it is a very small town. Okay. Well, that's
Yeah.
that's lovely. I
Yeah.
do, I mean, people call on me all the time for consulting with exactly that kind of thing. So please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually want to keep that in mind for if, you might be able to speak to the committee or,
100%. Yeah, no problem at all.
we are trying to think about eventually also trying to have like an open house for people that will kind of give them, the basics of what the cemetery bylaws are and then what you kind of and I want to make it something where somebody comes in and talks about what's your options or like
And where it's like
a
a little
local
more lively, right?
yeah like
Yeah.
bringing in like a local funeral director and then also maybe an expert on wills and that kind of thing to make it all kind of how to plan, right?
I just can't say enough about how thoughtful we need to be in these spaces. Like the tsunami that is coming at us in terms of people, entering the boomers entering their final sort of 20 years on this planet. It's gonna change everything. And if we're not willing to have these conversations now, it's only going to get harder and harder. So yeah,
Well,
thank
yeah,
you.
I
Like
mean,
reach out.
what we're noticing too is less and less people have church connections.
Yeah.
Less and less people have church services. We
Yeah.
don't have a local funeral home here.
Yeah.
So there's not even the funeral home service.
I know.
Less
And
and
so
less of
I
that.
know.
So
I know.
people really are kind of like not knowing what their options are and not having ceremonies and not having, yeah. That's a
I
whole other
know
topic. That's a
in
whole other
my
topic.
it a
But
whole it wholly is, and I can see in my room right now, in the Zoom room right now, I can see people who are in my doula class, and first of all, love you. And second of all, did you hear that, doulas? Did you hear that, doulas? We are going to be the bridges.
mhm.
We are going to be the bridges. And there's a lot of work to be done, but we are going to be the bridges. Barbara, my love, unmute and tell me what you have to say. It's so good to see you here.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so yes, I carry a little bag of my son's ashes, and they've been scattered in Ireland and Scotland and England and lots of behind the house that we lived in Montreal. So lots of wonderful places, meaningful places. But the
Mm-hmm.
other thing is my son's ashes are in a beautiful bent cedar box that
Mm-hmm.
my husband and my daughter and I commissioned specifically for the ashes, and the three of us have talked about like what's going to happen eventually. We've got a couple of our dogs' ashes there as well, and we have plans in process for what will, you were saying about then suddenly people go, oh my God, what do I do with this? Well, we've talked about it.
Yay!
you know. And I love having his ashes there right next to the fireplace, and it's a beautiful box. And the artist was amazing, a Vancouver artist, and it's just it means a lot to me. It's been 16 years, and I talk to him every day.
Every day, 100%. Do you know what? Every time, especially on Instagram, for example, when I post saying, "Hey, I'm doing this," and do you know what to do with the ashes? Every time I'll get somebody, many, sometimes many people who say, "Oh, I love having my fill in the blank here." When it brings peace, it brings peace. And I cannot say enough that that's not doing nothing. That is a very active choice of keeping those cremated remains close, right? Doing nothing is like in the closet feeling guilty, da 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 da. Right? Thank you for sharing that, my love. Anybody else? I have a few more minutes if anybody has any questions surfacing for them or comments. I love seeing your faces, by the way. All right, then. Well, thank you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for bearing with me when my internet just stopped. I can't believe, literally, I've been in other people's rooms when that has happened. It has never happened to me. But I'm so grateful, Jax, for you for being here. And thank you all for coming. I will send out the recording later, and please stay connected and stay in touch. All right. Oh, I love seeing those hearts. Thank you. That does my heart good. Goodbye, my lovelies. And to those who are in
Thank
class with
you.
me, I'll see you on Wednesday. All
Thanks,
right.
Krista.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye. Thank
Krista.
you.
Bye.
Oh, so good. Bye, everybody.